Feelings are data. And they signal us about what we're perceiving and what's going on inside us and what we're perceiving is going on around us. When we have big feelings, it's because we're perceiving something big. And so if you're grappling with big feelings and there's this voice in your head saying, oh, I shouldn't feel that, I think that's a really difficult place to be and a really special place to be.
Welcome to Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, a social worker specializing in human development and fascinated by human potential. For over 20 years, I've been a coach to families with successful businesses and leaders with successful careers. And you may be surprised to learn that true wealth is about coherence. When our inner state of being aligns with how we live, give, lead, and love. In this series, we will explore an integrated model to flourish coherently. Because wealth isn't what we have, it's who we are when we are fully aligned. Well, welcome to this episode of Wealth Coherence. I'm your host, Emily Bouchard, and we are exploring the interplay between our internal well-being and our external fulfillment. And in this conversation, we are going to dive into the emotional wealth, the emotional aspect of wealth. And I can't wait to dive in with Joshua Freedman, who I've already told I've been a covert stalker of for years. I just love Joshua's work. He is one of the foremost experts in emotional intelligence. He's written a number of books. Most recent was State of the Heart. And he has a new one coming out I can't wait to hear about and the research he's been doing. And he's the CEO and founder of a great organization called 6 Seconds that I have done some training with and really highly recommend. So welcome, Joshua, and would love for you to kick us off by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to devote your entire career to emotional intelligence.
Thank you. I don't know. It was sort of a little bit accidental, but I think the reality is I needed to learn about emotions myself. And I think like a lot of us, I grew up pretty uncomfortable with emotions. They seemed sort of random and even scary to me. And I had a lot of things that I thought were true, like that I needed to earn love, that emotions, there were negative emotions and positive emotions, that, emotions were sort of noise and I should push them away. And unlearning that's taken me a long time. And so here I am 30 years later, still working on this project.
Wow. Well, thank you for your devotion to it and for all the research you've done. I think it's like some of the longest research that's ever been done on emotional intelligence. And yeah, I would love for you to share a little bit about 6 Seconds, why you named it that and what it's about. And then we're going to dive in a little bit to how do we apply some really practical principles towards our inner relationship with wealth and with money.
Well, I'll take you back to the beginning. When we started 6 Seconds, I had been a teacher at a school called Nueva. And Annabelle Jensen, my co-founder, was the executive director there. And this journalist named Dan Goleman came and visited the school. And then he ended up writing about it in a really wonderful book. And 3 million people read the book, or at least bought it.
His book, Emotional Intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the seminal work on this topic. Yeah.
And then all these people started calling us saying, well, this book says like this is important and I believe it now, but it doesn't say how you do it. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me how? And so after a couple of years, we decided to start 6 Seconds to really answer that question of how. How do you put emotional intelligence into action? How do you grow it? How do you practice it? And what we found is that people who were interested in this work at that time, it was a really strange idea. Like I would get on an airplane and people would say, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I run a nonprofit about emotional intelligence. And they'd say, emotional what? And thankfully, now people are much more aware and really see the value. And I love working with younger people because people under, 30, 35, when you talk about emotional intelligence, that the answer is, yes, we really need that. And so that's been a really wonderful shift in the course of this work. But I think when you probe a little deeper and people say, yes, we really need that. And then you say, okay, great. So how are you using it? And they say, I don't know. I know it's important. I want to understand my own and others' emotions more, but I don't know how.
Mhm.
So the how to still remains really central to our work.
Yeah.
And our organization works with corporations, big, huge organizations, governments. We work with small companies, and we work with individual coaches, trainers, facilitators doing certification training. And then our social impact work is all about youth well-being. And I think we do our biggest project is in partnership with UNICEF in every single country and territory. And then I think of particular interest to people who are kind of in the audience that we're wanting to reach here. One of our big projects is called Climate of Emotions, and it's about the intersection of our relationship with the earth and with one another and with ourselves.
Oh, I want to talk
And
more about that for sure. I mean, you see my little pony in the background. I'm
yes.
so passionate about the power of spending time in the environment, in nature, with animals and the amazing wisdom that we can access and the emotional regulation that can happen with them.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful, and I want to hear more about that. I think we need to probably start with why did you name it 6 Seconds? I know why, but I'd like you to share a little bit about it because I think it's an intriguing name, right? And it's like I want to know more about that. So I'd love for people because your mind's
Well,
going.
that's the reason for the name. Um, One of our first advisory board members was named Candace Pert. And Candace is famous for the discovery of an emotion receptor in our prefrontal cortex. One of the things she became really famous for. And the prefrontal cortex is at the time was like that's the logic area of the brain. And why would we have emotion receptors in this logic area of the brain? And what Candace said is, well, it's because we're wired to feel and emotions are part of our thinking. They're not separate. But she told us emotions last in our brains and bodies for 5 to 7 seconds. And a separate piece of research we saw showed that when you listen to somebody with compassion, it takes them around 6 seconds to feel that compassionate connection. So we said, okay, it takes 6 seconds to manage our emotions. It takes 6 seconds to feel compassion. So it takes 6 seconds to change the world. And that's what we decided to name the organization.
I love that. And it's so doable, right? I mean, anybody who's listening can get like, okay, 6 seconds. I can do
All right,
six.
I'm in a rush. Okay, just 6 seconds.
That's great. Wow. And so what have you found has been like of all the things you've done in your research, like if you were to share some of like the top 3 things that people do or can use within that 6 second framework that can make the biggest difference, what have you discovered?
Well, my new book is really about making friends with all of our emotions and recognizing emotions as a message from us for us. And I think that this, in our world, there's so much noise about you should be happy, you should be this, you should look this way, you should. And we've kind of externalized so much of our identity and kind of curating so much of who we are and who we're supposed to be to kind of look a particular way. I think it's extremely difficult to connect with ourselves in that noise and in that environment. And so the notion that you have this built-in system that's there, it's free, it's available every moment of your day to kind of get these messages that are about what's going on inside you and that there's value in those messages and that maybe our life work is to learn to listen to those little whispers and to kind of sort out and go, okay, this is what's really important for me.
Mhm.
Adding to that one point, I don't think there's such a thing as negative or positive feelings. Feelings are data. and they signal us about what we're perceiving and what's going on inside us and what we're perceiving is going on around us. When we have big feelings, it's because we're perceiving something big. And so if you're grappling with big feelings and there's this voice in your head saying, oh, I shouldn't feel that, I think that's a really difficult place to be and a really special place to be. Like there's something you're seeing. And I've just been in so many spaces with people who are grappling with stuff, grappling with life. And I hear other people around trying to comfort and say, oh, you're fine. It's okay. You don't have to feel. And, around today's conversation, you don't have to feel guilty about your family wealth. You don't have to feel this. You don't have to feel that. And my response is, how wonderful that you feel that. What a gift it is that you are feeling these complicated, big feelings. There's
Oh,
wisdom there.
yeah, let's just pause for a second for somebody to just, whatever you're feeling right now as you're listening, whatever it is, whatever the emotion is, to know that it's wonderful to have that and just give yourself 6 seconds to be in that moment with whatever feeling you're having. What a gift to yourself. That's, I guess, like I could completely feel a difference in my body the moment you said it, and wanted to give a chance for other people to feel that. And I'll add too that one of the reasons I've started working with horses with people is because if there's an incongruence between how you're externally saying that you feel versus what you're feeling inside that maybe you're ignoring or you're not attuning to or not allowing yourself to feel, the horses will tune into that incoherence, and they will they will mirror for you what's actually so, and they will also support you in those instances to get coherent, to really get like congruent internally and externally, and they will show up very differently, and it can take as little as 6 seconds to do that. And that's a remarkable thing because you really feel it in your body and you see it physically demonstrated for you. So I think what you're saying is so powerful, and it's, I love it that it's not rocket science and it's totally free. And I like that you touched into like an important audience for this podcast, and one of the reasons why I'm doing it, because and you're very familiar with this population. I'm so thrilled to know that, so we can have a pretty important conversation about it, because um, so many people that are in the situation where they have wealth in their lives, whether they've inherited it or they've gotten a huge liquidity event, or um, they were the luck of the draw, they were with the right startup at the right time, right? Will have a myriad of emotions around it. Everything from shame, which I've heard is one of the lowest vibrational experiences in terms of where it can bring us if we stay there, versus if we just allow ourselves to feel it and move through it, to total, excite on the other end of the spectrum, like complete, enthusiastic elation, and yet they're all fleeting emotions if we allow them to move through us. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've seen or what you've experienced in terms of emotional intelligence related to wealth, to having significantly more than most of the people in the world.
I think that probably shame and guilt are what I've heard about the most. Um, I had a conversation with a young man at a conference who was kind of in position where he would inherit a lot of wealth, and I think a lot of people in their kind of under 35 stage of their lives, I imagine, in this position where it's like, okay, this wealth is more abstract,
Mm-hmm.
right? And maybe I have some influence, but I don't have control. And maybe I don't like what my family is doing with our wealth. And I think there's a lot of struggle around that. And often, looking at where the wealth came from, it's bad stuff has happened that has contributed to your family wealth. And so there's a lot of complexity around that, both that sense of power and powerlessness, of entitlement and kind of rejection of it. And I think that puts a lot of people in this place of incoherence, this
Yeah.
place of like, well, like the Jenga blocks are kind of wobbly, and I've like got this stack where I don't I don't have my hands around it.
Mhm.
And the way people deal with that discomfort sometimes is really messy and problematic for them and for others. And so I would, it's a kind of painful paradox that being in this place of like having a lot of affluence, but not actually feeling that sense of agency.
Yeah, and it's what to go back what you said before, there's a huge cultural thing about if you have the wealth, you shouldn't have any negative feelings about it, right?
Yeah.
And that shooting on yourself or having people, if there's so many presumptions about what it is that it's like where's the space to have it? And if you were to actually be honest and maybe with yourself or others about those conflicted feelings, the degree of lack of empathy or understanding from those that don't have it is also a very painful thing too. And I'm wondering what with what you've seen, and I've seen it too in terms of the shame and the guilt and the this inner conflict of, in a sense, entitled, like well, it's part of the family, and it's part of my life, and at the same time the rejection or the discord
Right.
around it. What is it that you've learned through your research that makes the biggest difference for somebody to have a sense of more coherence around something like wealth?
There's a term that I heard from a queer psychologist originally, disenfranchised grief. I don't know what the origin of the term is, but it's this notion that you aren't allowed to have the grief that you have. And it's often caught up in kind of comparative grieving and like things are tough for me, but they're so much worse for others. I shouldn't feel so. Right. And I think that maybe one of the fulcrum points for all of us is it is what it is. There's a Buddhist principle suffering comes from denying what is.
Mhm.
And so when we're in that place of, I shouldn't have this, I shouldn't feel this, I don't want it to, it is this way, but I don't want it to be this way, that is a form of incoherence. And it's in that denial of what is suffering. And pain, Buddha said pain is getting hit with an arrow and suffering is standing there to get hit with a second arrow. Right? Pain
Or I would
is
say taking the arrow and then like hitting yourself with it again and again. It's like, no, it just hit you once. Like, yeah.
this
Mhm.
acknowledgement, it is what it is.
Mhm.
And yes, this is the legacy that I have. This is the moment that I have. These are the choices that I have. These are the feelings that I have. And that is what it is.
Yeah.
And I can feel all of this big mix of feelings. I think this is another big lesson for me is we don't just have one feeling at a time. We have multiple feelings.
Mhm.
And we can feel really grateful to our grandparents and great grandparents and like, wow, you kind of set things up. So my life is a lot easier in some ways. And at the same time, feel um, some guilt or some loss or some doubt or some uncertainty or some helplessness or some anger about that. And all that can be true. And just starting with that place of saying, okay, it is what it is. This is where I am. These are the feelings that I have. I think that being able to be in that, and I'll tell you that took me years because I was really scared of feelings. And I thought if I let myself feel my feelings, it'll be overwhelming and I'll get lost. And I think a lot of people feel like I have these big feelings, and if I kind of touch it, it's going to be Pandora's box. And Emily, what I found is that it's actually the opposite. Is that what I've seen when people start to acknowledge what is, their feelings feel less overwhelming. And there's really fascinating fMRI studies of this where you put somebody in an fMRI and you show them an upsetting video and then they name their feelings and their brains change in a matter of about 6 seconds.
Yeah, there's an amazing thing when we take the time to be present with ourselves. It doesn't take long, and to just honor and acknowledge what that feeling is with the idea and then like the notion that it's this too shall pass, I guess would be the other. It's like if you're not comfortable or not enjoying it, as opposed to trying to resist it, ignore it, suppress it.
Mm,
Much better to feel it as fully as you can in that moment, allow yourself to acknowledge it, and know that within 6 seconds it'll be gone. Like it doesn't have to keep lasting. And I have a dear friend who's just lost a dear pet, a wonderful dog in her life. And um, we've a group of us are just staying with her with the grief, and we talk about how it's like waves. Like she'll be fine 1 minute and then it'll hit her, and it's like, yeah, ride that wave. And it's like surfing. You catch the wave, and sometimes it just lasts for 6 seconds, right? And you have this ride, and sometimes it can be really bumpy and unpleasant, sometimes it can be really exhilarating. But it's really allowing ourselves to be the best surfers we can with the emotions as they arise, as opposed to feeling like we're only supposed to feel some things and not others, or this isn't good. And I think that something like shame and guilt can be really debilitating. And it can also cause
yeah.
us to make decisions that aren't necessarily in our best interest or not in keeping with our values and what matters most to us, because it's being driven by an emotional state that we've allowed to become more of a like a mood or an orientation towards our wealth, and whatever it might be, as opposed to being in a place of, oh, I'm feeling some real guilt around this right now, maybe not the best time to make a decision. Let me find out where the guilt's coming from first.
I think it's worth differentiating for a moment between shame and guilt. So they're both what emotions researchers describe these as moral emotions because they serve a corrective function. They do tell us there's some way I'm out of balance with my values and my beliefs. But guilt is more internally oriented, and it's more connected with remorse and this sense of like, I don't like what I did. Where shame is more externally oriented, and it's more connected with what we think or what others are saying. Again, going back to the kind of focus that we have in our world today on externalities, I think there's a lot of energy that gets sucked into what we think others will think. So there's this piece about, well, what are your feelings versus what you think other people's feelings are or opinions are. Like what's important for you. And I think a big part of this work is learning to distinguish between your own feelings, your own truths, your own values, your own identities, and those that are placed on you. And even as something as simple as I was reading, a friend of mine was writing about how he's wearing this jacket that he really likes. Does he like it because other people like it and it's expensive? Or does he like it because he really likes it? Right. And we are social animals. So our emotions are very caught up in our relationships with others. But like, what part of this is yours?
Mhm.
What part of this is important for you? And I think that work is this lifetime work. I'll kind of figure out, yeah, where are my own values and my own feelings in this? And stepping out of the kind of noise. I think sometimes we're in the noise because it's more comfortable, and kind of sitting with our feelings is like, oh, this is a lot. I'm going to go back to the noise and distraction. Um, but if we can kind of put our toes in the water a little bit and kind of sense it and go, okay, now I'm going to go back into the noisy world and, live. But then I'm going to step out for a moment and go, okay, what's really going on for me? And that noticing of what's really going on for me and what is my voice, what is my message, what are my values, distinct from all of those externalities, is a big project.
It is. Where do you recommend somebody start, right? If people have been spending a lifetime avoiding those emotions or feelings, and maybe you could speak a little bit about the difference between a feeling and an emotion too, if you have a distinction about that too, because I think sometimes
Sure.
people can get confused about that.
So I just think about it as a matter of time. An emotion is an immediate biological response. Um, it's automatic, but it's automatic within a system that we've set up. So I'm going to have Emily says something to me and I'm going to have an automatic reaction. But yesterday I, went for a walk, and yesterday I had a nice lunch, and last night I slept well. And so today my automatic reaction is going to be different than it would be if those things weren't true. So it's emotion is an automatic reaction inside a context that we have contributed to, if not created. The feeling comes afterwards. The emotions are chemicals that affect every living cell in our brains and bodies. And these emotions go running around. They are part of our regulatory system. They change everything. They change the way we think, the way we digest, our heart rates, our muscles, our every bodily system is affected by these emotion chemicals. And then we start to feel that. We physically feel the temperature in our heart. We feel the tension in our throat. We might even feel, am I smiling or frowning? We might feel the little crinkles. We might feel this little spot. We might feel the tension in our neck. So as the emotions begin to work in us, we feel them. And the feeling is a way that we can start making sense and tuning in. And so the notion of embodied emotion or embodiment, Antonio Damasio, one of my favorite neuroscientists, wrote, emotions are embodied. Our brains are not separate. It's not like our brains don't stop here. Actually, we have brain cells that go all the way down to our toes. And so we have these chemicals and we have these cells that are carrying information back and forth. Noticing that physical sensation is part of what helps us understand what's happening emotionally. In the new book I wrote, emotions are the first draft of meaning making.
Meaning making. I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I was going to ask you about that too, right? Because I think that so often we'll have a sensation and we will immediately go to, I'm feeling this way because of this. And we'll
Mhm.
have we'll start making meaning and we might attach it to things that have happened in the past or something
Yeah.
that we're anticipating in the future. And none of that might be accurate, but we just tend to immediately want to go there to have a sense of control or say or agency around it. So yeah, that's really interesting that that's how you define them. And it's so important to catch that, I think, even within those 6 seconds, like, oh, let me just be with what I'm feeling. And I get that a lot when I'm on a horse. It's a constant practice for me. And the amount of fear and anxiety that I have, even just getting on the horse, it's quite
Yeah.
something.
Some of
And
them are really tall.
they're huge. I'm a little person. That's why I love my pony so much. But even he can get feisty, and it's like, sometimes I look at him, I'm like, yeah, you might be little, but you weigh a lot more than I do. And that hoof you have right there could knock me out. It's like and so there's a way in which I need to continually self-regulate
Yeah.
and not let the meaning run away with me, or it can completely
Yeah.
jeopardize the whole experience that I want to have and my learning. Because that's the other thing. You worked at the school. There's so much research around our emotions and how they can support us in our learning, or they can completely shut us down and make it very hard for us to learn. And maybe you
Yeah.
could share a little bit about that, because it's so important. This is a learning planet. Like, that's how we grow, is by learning. And how do we harness our emotions to support us in our learning?
Yeah. I think that sort of simple thing to talk about is stress. And so as we become more stressed, all these sort of different systems activate us in us, and it has to do with our perceived threat, right? So there's that horse's hoof is that pony's hoof. That's a threat. And how we perceive that threat and how we evaluate and think about that threat starts to change our physiology. One of the things that happens as we become more stressed is that we shift into a more short-term focus, more survival oriented, right? And we start to focus more on the threats and less on the opportunities. So that's useful. That's not a bad thing. Right? That's not negative. Like it really helps us survive. But there's a risk that we stay in it, right? And as we stay in that short term and we're overly focused on the risks and we're overly focused on surviving in this moment, it's really hard for us to be creative. It's really hard for us to take in new information. It's really hard for us to use our imagination and go beyond this moment. So one of the great things is we have multiple feelings at any given time. And I mean this from a biological level. Like, these are chemicals that are running around in our brains and bodies. They're produced all over the place. These little messengers are sometimes described as little keys that are going into the locks of our different cells, receptor sites. And they're produced all over our bodies. And as these little messengers are running around, they're dock on the cell, they deliver their message, they're absorbed. They last for up to about 6 seconds, but we have a lot of different ones. And so at the same time as feeling stressed, I might be feeling hopeful. I might be feeling curious. I might be feeling loving. I might be feeling open. I might be feeling excited. I might be feeling mad. I might be feeling worried. Like there's all these different things that are going on at the same time. And one of the places where we have a lot of liberty in our emotions is as we start to notice that we have more than one at a time. And so it's not that I have to invent it. Like it's not like, oh, I'm feeling stressed and I'm not at all excited and now I have to invent excitement. It's actually, no, I have some excitement and I have some fear, and I'm experiencing that as stress. And my first draft of meaning is that this is a problem. But my second draft of meaning is this is opportunity. And it's not that the fear is bad and that I shouldn't be afraid. It's that the fear is love. The fear is part of my connection with something bigger. My fear, if I feel fear, it's because I care. And it's just a different aspect, a different lens on this experience that I'm having. So I think as we can start to notice these multiple feelings, and it's really hard to notice them when we're telling ourselves this is bad and I shouldn't have it. Right. So the first step is just going, okay, all these feelings are data. They're all messages for me, from me. And then the second step is I have multiple ones of them. And then the third step is they're telling me different things and I can tune in and notice these different aspects of my experience.
That's great. You're making me think of one of my favorite analogies that I like to give to clients when they're feeling really anxious or worried or apprehensive. And I'll get them to think about, like, if they were standing in line for their favorite roller coaster, that the physiological experience they're having, that they're naming that, may be apprehension in the other side too, right? There's that physiology of anticipation and looking forward to the thrill. And so they can tap into that. And oftentimes it's like taking those butterflies in your stomach and having them fly in formation, right? Because you're choosing how to orient towards the experience, the physiology of what's happening, as opposed to having to mean one thing versus another, and knowing that those two can be simultaneous is so brilliant, because then you can have both. Yeah, like, it's going to, of course it's scary, that's why I'm doing it, and it's so much fun, that's why I'm doing it, like it's
Yeah.
both and.
Well, and this really goes into the topic of conversations around wealth within your family, with others. One of the things that I've seen for myself in my own family is it's hard to talk about money, and it's hard to know what the right thing to say is and how to do that. And there are a lot of feelings. And I think one of the cool things about emotions is they are a universal language. And that when we can start saying, hey, I want to talk about this, but I have some different feelings. And, what are some of your different feelings? All of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, we have a lot of common ground. Maybe the reasons we feel anxious might be different, but we both feel anxious. Maybe the reasons we feel guilt are different, but we both feel guilt. Maybe the reasons we feel grateful are different, but we both feel grateful. And so I would say really allowing emotions to be a connector in this conversation is a great way to enter into a more honest conversation with family members around wealth.
Yeah, and leading with it can really help you enter into conversations that you do have some trepidation about, right? Like, as you're saying, and a lot of times the beneficiaries of wealth may feel hesitant to bring it up, and to start off with, I have a lot of hesitation and some anxiety around bringing this up, because I don't want to be perceived as greedy or entitled or uh, expecting something. And I'm finding myself so anxious about being in the dark about what's expected of me and what I am to expect. And it's making it hard for me to plan for what I need to be doing. And I know that you guys are, you always say, I'm going to be taken care of and don't worry about it. But I actually am really worried. And it's not because I don't trust you, it's because I want to be able to trust myself with it.
Mm.
That kind of approach can be a way to start into a conversation that's like, you maybe have been given messages like, it's not safe to talk about this, it's not okay to
Mm-hmm.
bring it up. If we've gotten those messages, oftentimes it's because our parents or our grandparents don't know how to have the conversation, and they don't want to, like, do harm, so they don't talk about it. So it's not that, so being able to shift it to the emotional side, like, hey, it seems like it might be really uncomfortable for you to talk about it. Maybe we could just start talking about, I like talking about the history of the money or the wealth,
Mm-hmm.
or like, tell me about some of the values behind it. Like, I really want to start being able to talk about it in a way that's more um, allows all of us to feel better about the conversation over time, like that kind of thing. And that can be helpful to initiate too.
One of the things that, I mean, I struggled with this both as a child sometime in the past and as a parent sometime in the present. And I do really, with 20 something kids, it's like, okay, I'm not quite sure how much to share and like what is going to be helpful for them to know. And what has been good for me, and I feel like where we found some alignment in our family and across different, brothers, sisters, family, is being able to talk about values.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, we have some money that we'd like to give away. How do we decide? Like, what criteria do we use? We have some money that we want to invest. How do we decide? Not where should we put it, but how do we decide? And that, I think, when we can feel that sense of values alignment and realize across generations, okay, well, we have really different attitudes about money, but there's some things where we share values around. And if we can find some of those, I mean, hopefully there's some, in my family, we've been able to find some shared values.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, my kids have both at sometimes said, well, we should just give away all the money we have. Capitalism is bad. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can absolutely see why you're saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the value that's behind that, the principle that's behind that, and how can we honor those values, but also take care of our inheritance in a way that's respectful to our family.
Well, and that's a really good point, because when parents have children that have a reactive emotional response to the wealth because of what they see happening in the world and how rich people are being perceived, and there's so much that's in play right now, that when they come forward with that reactivity, that's another way to start talking about the emotional intelligence and competence that can be cultivated within the family around it. And part of that is by allowing them to have that immediate reactivity, and then also creating the space for them to go into, where is that coming from? What values are they tapping into, like you said? And, if they had more agency with it in the future, but, it was part of their life, they could certainly give it away. But what are some other things that they might be able to do to have an impact on what they're caring about, that they're seeing? And, to kind of expand for them what's the hyper agency that's involved when you have wealth.
So we're starting to move towards purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right? We went from this kind of inner awareness to values, which is kind of connected with what do
It's
we want
all
to do.
interrelated. That's why we're having the conversation. That's where the coherence happens. Yeah.
And I think that part of what has been fascinating to me is thinking about how emotions are actually beacons or indicators around what really matters.
Yeah.
And purpose really matters. So again, when we have big feelings, what if those are telling us something about purpose and alignment? And where am I paying attention? And where am I not paying attention? So if you think about every emotion is kind of giving you a perspective, and it's saying, oh, look at this side of the situation. Oh, look at this side of the situation. Look at this side of the situation. And the bigger the feeling, the more important that thing that the feelings are trying to get you to look at is. And purpose is one of those really big things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for people who are struggling with emotions around wealth to be able to step into this conversation with yourself and with family around what is the purpose that's kind of calling you? What is the purpose that is centered in this emotional story? If these emotions are actually telling you something about your purpose, what are they telling you about? And how does that purpose become something you can live in your day to day?
And it's always within the greater context of what's the purpose of this wealth. And I work with so many parents where that's the first step that we take, is for them to get clear on their narrative and the purpose of the wealth, and what are the actions, what are the emotions that they've expressed, what are the things they've said that they've wrapped around the wealth that's caused their kids to interpret it in certain ways as well, and what are the messages that they've put forward in terms of their purpose, and what is it that they want to transfer with, like, that's part of the transfer of the numbers is those values and that purpose. And then within that, allowing for this, well, if I feel really called to not do anything with capitalism, but to do something completely different, um, well, how can this wealth support that and not hinder your self-actualization? But at the same time, it's part of your identity. So how to be at peace with all the aspects of who you are, as opposed to rejecting a certain aspect of it.
So I think part of that emotional discordance has to
Mhm.
do with when those things aren't lined up,
Right.
right? And when the way I'm living my life is not actually in line with what feels really important to me.
Mhm.
And I think that's a place where, I mean, I know with my kids, like when we travel together, we stay in much nicer hotels than when they travel by themselves. And there's a part of them that likes that, right? And it's like nice to stay in a really nice hotel. And there's a part of them that's like uncomfortable with it. Like, I think I would rather be camping than staying in this nice hotel. So that's a discordance, right? Where they're allowing their parents' choices to kind of shape their experience. Um, and I think that, first just saying, yeah, that's real. Like that is what's happening. Right? There's a giving up when they come on a trip with us and they stay in that nice hotel. There's a giving up of their values. And that's part of where the tension comes from.
Mhm.
And then when they kind of act snippy with us and like, why are we staying in this fancy hotel? It's like, I can take that as really insulting and ungrateful, but I can also take that as like, oh, there's a values misalignment here. And
That
I am putting them in a situation where they're kind of doing what I want. Can I reciprocate that? Can we have some balance of like, okay, well, what would they want in this situation, and how can we do that? Uh, I think the big question is this purpose that we're caring about? Is it only outside us? Is it like out there in the future? Is it somewhere distant? Or is it something that we can bring into our own day-to-day interactions?
Yeah. And it's the more we can do it in the day to day, the more that fulfillment of life really takes hold in a different way. And that coherence really guides us in our decision making. And we do feel that alignment. And I'll say, that story about the travel with the parents is really meaningful for a lot of people. And I'll take it a step further, which is when somebody doesn't have coherence around the family wealth and where they've come from, and they go away to college or university or on a service trip, or whatever, and they meet somebody and they are totally enjoying this friendship or this relationship in a certain way, and it comes time to bring that person home. This is oftentimes a major pain point in that relationship. And it can be a breakdown in trust as well.
Yeah.
You never told me, or what? And there's this, well, why should it make a difference? But if there's a disconnect internally around the family home, the wealth that you've come from, and who you are externally facing in the world, it's going to have an impact on your relationships and the trust that people have with you. And the other side of it is if you are totally overt about it and putting it on social media and making sure everybody knows about the wealth, the private jets and whatever it is, and then people clamor to be your friend, want to be with you, then there's immediate distrust about why they want to. So it's like this very difficult position people can be in when they are born into families where there's significant affluence and in wealthy communities, and they expand out beyond them. So I don't know how you support people in having that sense of that inner coherence and that their feeling state to allow for that sense of their own personal narrative about it, that they can feel congruent in their lives
Mm-hmm.
around who they are with their family and in their life and in their friends and relationships.
Well, you talked about the word trust, and I do think it's worth just kind of double clicking on
Mhm.
trust to say trust is an emotion, right? Trust is something that we feel, and it's a primal emotion. It's emotion about safety. We're hardwired. This is, a million-year old part of us. We're hardwired to be assessing trust all the time. And it's relational. So trust is something we create together. And I think if we use trust as a kind of barometer for our relationships and we learn how to trust ourselves and how to build trust together, that you can kind of ignore almost everything else and just say, if I can really tune in to being trustworthy and building trust with others, you're going to have great relationships. And that if you're in that position that you're describing, Emily, where it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to bring this person home to my parents' house, there's something you're not trusting. And it's painful to think like, oh, I actually don't know if I trust this person with this part of my experience. But I think that's a signal. That distrust is a signal to say, okay, there's work to do here. There's work to do here on our connection, on our sharing. Trust is rooted in caring, consistency, and competence. And do I think this person cares? Do I think that this person keeps showing up in the same way in these different spaces? Is it predictable? And do they have the skills? And maybe they don't, maybe they don't have the life experience to kind of come home to a crazy family house with the helicopter or whatever. Like, I don't have that life experience. And that would be like, I would go, oh, this is really weird. Right.
Mhm.
But that's a lack of experience for me. Doesn't mean I don't care and I'm not consistent, but maybe I can learn how to do that. So the competence part of it is the most learnable part. And I think kind of tuning into, okay, where is this distrust coming from? And what can I do about that?
Yeah, and that internal trust for sure is a place to start. I love that. And I'm actually in the process of writing a book on trust in family businesses and family enterprises. And I'll add one other distinction to it. I love how you just described it. There's also an assessment that we're making about sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in the scenario I described is that the person that didn't know about your background and this huge mansion you're going to, if that's the situation, is they're going to feel like you've been insincere in how
Yeah.
you've represented yourself. And it's very hard when that's the main assessment of the trust breakdown, because it's just your word against their word. And when you bring in the consistency, or I call it reliability, the competence, and the care, those can really be measured, assessed. There's like external ways to observe and measure whether those are happening. With sincerity, it's really about, do you mean what you say, right? Like you
Yeah.
say, you're struggling, but and it's like, well, no, I don't have access to that. That's my parents' money. It's not my money. I mean, maybe in the future, but I'm just like you. I'm having to figure out how to pay, whatever it might be. So that's a big part of the trust breakdown that can happen. And so being really honest with yourself around what the family wealth means to you and what your relationship is to it and all the feelings about it allows you to show up in your relationships in a way that you trust yourself, and you can also trust that you can assess the person you're with and how trustworthy they are with this internal conflict you might have, and you get to see their response to it and how they relate to it and how they relate to you. My gosh, I could talk about trust with you for another hour. The topic I think is so important, but I think I'd like for you to share a little bit about uh, the research that's going to be in your upcoming book, and also any other words of wisdom you might have in terms of like when people find themselves, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just bought another handbag. Like when there's like the shopping and the spending as a way to try and somehow get a feeling fulfilled when it's not going to actually happen that way. It's very, that kind
Yeah.
of hedonic treadmill that we can get on. I don't know
I
if you
was
have
going to
any.
use that exact term.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I think, again, there's so much in our lives right now that pushes us into external focus, what we buy, what we drive, what we wear. And there, at some level, we know what people are posting on social media is not real, right? But there's this part of us that's like, oh, that is like, I feel it. I feel it's real. Like in some way, we know our worth is not, like how cool our glasses are is not really our worth as a human being. And yet there is this element of there's literally billions of dollars being spent every year to get us to buy stuff and to tell us Well, if you bought the right stuff, you would feel better. If you bought the right stuff, you would have the relationships that you want. If you bought the right stuff, you would have the fulfillment that you want. And we can know that that's BS, but we're so bombarded by that, it's really hard not to feel it. So, what I would say in that moment where you're like, oh, I just bought this thing and I didn't really want to, and I did it again, and that's not who I want to be. And then I start this cycle of difficult feelings. Again, that's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you have that feeling, that is a gift, that you're awake to something. There's something you care about. And so, yes, feel guilty. Feel it. Feel jealous. Feel excited. Feel hopeful. Feel helpless. Like, feel those things because you're alive. And when you feel those things and you can say, oh, these are messages from me, for me, about what I care about. So what do I care about? What really matters? One of the things in this Climate of Emotions project, where we're working primarily with young activists, is that a lot of climate activists have attached their sense of purpose and identity to an externality. I'm going to lower global temperature. I'm, 17 years old and that's my mission. And then temperature goes up and then you feel crappy. And we absolutely need to lower global temperature. And that's not your job alone. So one of the pieces that I really encourage people to look at is, what is your internal work of your purpose? What part of it is directly in your influence and control? And so maybe what you realize is that the path to lowering temperature in the world is that people feel more connected. And I don't know, feel more coherent in your case, feel more hopeful, feel able to have better conversations, feel more trust, whatever the pathway that you see is. That's work you can do in yourself. That's work you can do sitting around the dinner table with your family. That's work you can do with your friends. It's work you can do by yourself. It's work you can do on your pony, right? That's the practice of purpose on the inside. And I think when we shift more of our focus to that internal world and that internal work, this external noise gets quieter, and those whispers from us for us become easier to hear.
And it
So
makes it
that would be
easier to
my
make,
wish for people.
oh yeah. And I think it makes it easier to make the decisions that you maybe will feel less guilty about afterwards, because you're coherent with what you're up to and why this is why I'm doing this way. And yeah. And oh, this has been so amazing. Do you want to share a little bit about your new book and what's going to be in
It's
it and
all
when,
Yeah, it's all about emotions. Part one is about emotions as data and how we can
Mhm.
make sense of them. And then part two is about emotional intelligence and how we use emotions to create the changes we're trying to make personally and professionally. And then part three is about emotional wisdom and how do we use emotions to help us be the people we really want to be and to shift away from some of the doing and more into being.
Oh, wow. Well, that's perfect to end on. And Joshua, we will put in the show notes ways that people can be following you and be in touch for when this book comes out. And so grateful we had a chance to have this conversation and for all the work you're doing in a nonprofit to support us in having the emotional intelligence we need to have lives that are more fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wealth Coherence. If it resonated, I'd love for you to share it or leave a review. This will help others find their way to this space. And if you're ready to keep exploring what it means to live, lead, and give from a place of coherence, head to emilybouchard.com to stay connected. Until next time, be well internally and allow your external life to be the fullest expression of who you truly are.